So in this video, I would like to explain normal descriptive adjectives in Russian. Descriptive adjectives describe nouns such as people, things, places, and ideas, like the words fast, new, beautiful, big, small, tall, red, blue, and so on. In Russian, there are many different forms of each adjective, and what's really significant to know is that each adjective relates to the 6 Russian cases, the 3 grammatical genders, and plurality. Even though it sounds like a lot, once you understand the 6 cases and 3 genders, it's simple enough to understand. When trying to utilize adjectives in Russian, you should always pay attention to the stem or the dictionary form of each adjective, and then you can form the rest. First, you should know that the dictionary form of a Russian adjective is always in the nominative masculine form. Secondly, you should know that there are 3 types of Russian adjectives: normal, short, and comparative and superlative. Thirdly, you should know that normal adjectives are separated into hard and soft endings, meaning that you will see 2 grammatical patterns for each type of adjective. Short adjectives typically make a statement about something, and nouns do not follow them. Comparative and superlative adjectives compare one thing to something else, and I will explain these 2 concepts in the next videos. For this video, I'll only cover normal adjectives. Normal adjectives in Russian come before a noun, and their English equivalent is a statement like big table, beautiful car, or new window. Normal adjectives have to match in gender, case, and plurality, meaning that there are multiple endings for each adjective. As I said previously, normal adjectives separate into hard and soft endings, and before understanding how to modify adjectives, we have to know how to identify an adjective first. Any type of adjective in Russian has the following endings in the word, meaning that there are no exceptions: oi, i, and ni. The endings oi, I, and I are the endings that you'll find within hard adjectives, and they have the first modification pattern to match the gender, case, and plurality. Adjectives that end in ni have the second modification pattern, likewise matching the gender, case, and plurality. The good news is that within any modification, the pattern will always be the same, so it doesn't matter what adjective you decide to use. For instance, the 3 hard endings for normal adjectives, oi, I, and I, will have the same pattern when modifying their case. This means that you don't have to worry about different patterns for different endings. In other words, the 3 hard endings follow the same pattern, so it doesn't matter what ending is used. And the same concept even applies to normal adjectives with soft endings, just in a different pattern. Because hard adjectives are very common, the way that they're modified is by dropping off their endings, that is oi, I, or I, and then applying the ending that matches the gender, case, and plurality. The same concept also applies to adjectives with soft endings. In the nominative, which is the dictionary form, a masculine adjective ends in I, a feminine ends in aya, a neuter ends in oye, and the plural ends in iye. In the accusative, which works with animate and inanimate objects, a masculine ends in I, and if it's animate, it ends in ogo. Native Russian speakers will say ova. A feminine will end in uyu, a neuter will end in oye, and the plural will end in iye or ich if it's animate. In the genitive, a masculine will end in ova, a feminine will end in oi, a neuter will end in ova, and the plural will end in ich. As you can see, some endings are borrowed from different cases and therefore repeated. In the dative, a masculine ends in omu, a feminine ends in oi, a neuter ends in omu, and the plural ends in im. In the instrumental, the pattern is oi, ummi, and in the prepositional, the pattern is oi, ich. Now that I've shown each modification, it would be impossible to remember all of these endings because there are too many of them. What I recommend doing is to focus on the most vital ones, like the nominative, genitive, and dative, because they're used more than the other ones. Still, this is the pattern that you'll follow either way, so try to get a feel for it when such adjectives are used in context. Here are a few sample adjectives that I would like to use in order to show how they're used within sentences. There will not be too many examples because it might get too confusing, but I will give a general idea of how these adjectives are used properly. Here we have the adjectives большой, маленький, and новый. Большой is big, маленький is small, and novy is new. As you can see, each adjective has a different ending, yet they all follow the hard adjective category in normal adjectives. To make learning simple and practical, every sentence that you'll see will utilize 3 different nouns in the 3 genders under every case. Let's begin with большой, and let's work with the following nouns: stol, машина, and okno, meaning table, car, and window. Using the nominative case, the adjective большой and the nouns stol, машина, and okno will look like this: большой стол, большая машина, большое окно, and большие столы, машины, and окна. Let's not forget that we also have to modify the nouns to fit the grammatical case, and that sometimes we have to change a vowel because it's an exceptional rule in Russian. Even though the ending in the plural should be an y, it changes to e because it's an exceptional spelling rule. Now, let's do the same thing but with the adjective маленький. Маленький стол, маленькая машина, маленькое окно, and маленькие столы, машины, окна. Despite using a different normal adjective that has a different ending, the modification pattern from before still applies to this adjective, with one exception in the plural having a spelling rule. Now, let's try the adjective новый. Новый стол, новая машина, новое окно, and новые столы, машины, окна. In this case, the modification is still the same and matches perfectly with no exceptions. Now, let's try the same words in the accusative, which works with animate and inanimate objects, and this is where you'll see the nouns changing to fit the grammatical case. Additionally, this is where a few phrases will not make sense logically, but again, we're simply focusing on adjectives. These are the sentences that I will use. Я вижу большой стол. Я вижу большого студента. Я вижу большую машину. Я вижу большое окно. Я вижу большие столы, and я вижу больших студентов. Because all of these sentences are in the accusative, you can see the grammatical patterns of the animate and inanimate objects that sometimes change and sometimes don't. The nouns and the adjectives also change because they're in the accusative. One exception is that in the plural, we use e instead of e because it's a spelling rule. Everything else basically follows the pattern for the accusative. Here are the same phrases, but with the adjective маленький. You can try to read these sentences on your own. Here are the same phrases with the adjective новый. I really hope that you can now understand the idea of modifying adjectives so that they fit the case, gender, and plurality, because in English, adjectives and nouns always stay in one form, but in Russian, there are 6 ways of modifying them. Once you get used to it, the concept becomes much simpler. Nonetheless, let's keep going, and this is where I'll begin to give one example with one adjective so you can modify the other adjectives on your own. Here, we have the adjective большой in the genitive, and this is the sentence that I will use. Кусок большого стола, кусок большой машины, кусок большого окна, and кусок больших столов, машин, окон. The endings match in the adjectives and nouns because all of these statements are in the genitive. Additionally, some of the endings of the adjectives use e instead of e because it's a spelling rule. Now, try to replicate these phrases but with the adjective маленький. This is what it's going to look like, and you can try to say these phrases on your own. Now, try to replicate these phrases but with новый. This is what it's going to look like. Here, we have the adjective большой in the dative, and this is the sentence that I will use. Идти к большому столу, идти к большой машине, идти к большому окну, and идти к большим столам, машинам, окнам. The endings match the adjectives and nouns because they're all in the dative, with one exception using e instead of ü. Now, try to replicate these phrases with маленький. This is what it's going to look like. Now, try it with the adjective новый. This is what it's going to look like. Here, we have the adjective большой in the instrumental, and this is the sentence that I will use. Я с большим столом, я с большой машиной, я с большим окном, and я с большими столами, машинами, окнами. The endings match because they're all in the instrumental, but they have more exceptions using e instead of ü. Now, try to replicate these phrases, but with the adjective маленький. This is what it's going to look like, and there are also more exceptions in this one. Now, try it with the adjective новый. This is what it's going to look like. Finally, we have the adjective большой in the prepositional, and this is the sentence that I will use. Я говорю о большом столе, я говорю о большой машине, я говорю о большом окне, and я говорю о больших столах, машинах, окнах. The endings match because they're all in the prepositional, with only one exception using e instead of ü. Now, try it with the adjective маленький. This is what it's going to look like. Now, try it with the adjective новый. This is what it's going to look like. After showing you all of this information, this is probably a lot to handle, but this is how modifying adjectives works in Russian. They have to match in gender, case, and plurality, depending on how they're used. Practically, however, you will not tend to use at least half of what I showed, but still, it was a good practicing lesson, so that you can understand when and how to use these adjectives in context. In case you get completely lost, or simply forget when or how to use an adjective, you can always use separate sites to remind you. One very useful website is Conjugator, which modifies adjectives that I showed in this video. We can take the adjectives that I showed, or practically any adjective, and plug it in the website, and it will give every possible declension and modification of that adjective. If you would like to use it and try it for yourself, I have its link in the description of this video. At last, allow me to finish the concept of normal adjectives under the soft category. Normal adjectives in Russian that end in a soft ending, that is, ni, are not as common as the other adjectives, but the good thing about them is that it's the only ending that they have. When modifying adjectives that have soft endings, you will also notice that the endings simply use the soft form of the first added vowel, like I, which becomes I, A, which becomes ya, O, which becomes ye, and U, which becomes you. Other than these endings, the hard and soft forms are basically the same. In the nominative, a masculine adjective ends in I, a feminine ends in yaya, a neuter ends in yeye, and a plural ends in iye. In the accusative, the pattern is I or yevo, you, iye, and iye or ich. In the genitive, the pattern is yevo, yei, yevo, and ich. In the dative, the pattern is yemu, yei, yemu, and im. In the instrumental, the pattern is im, yei, or sometimes yeyu, im, and imi. In the prepositional, the pattern is yem, yei, yem, and ich. As I said previously, it's impossible to remember all of these endings, so therefore, try to focus on the vital ones, like the nominative, genitive, and dative. Nonetheless, I'll still show all of these changes in context. Here, we have the adjective синий, which means blue, And because adjectives with soft endings are not that common, I'm using the color синий as a very useful one. I'll also use the same phrases as before, this time with the adjective синий instead. Here we have синий in the nominative. Синий стол, синяя машина, синее окно, and синие столы, машины, окна. Here we have синий in the accusative. Я вижу синий стол, я вижу синего кита, я вижу синюю бабочку, я вижу синее окно, я вижу синие столы, and я вижу синих китов. The endings perfectly match the adjectives and nouns because they're all in the accusative, including animate and inanimate objects. Here we have синий in the genitive. Кусок синего стола, кусок синей машины, кусок синего окна, and кусок синих столов, машин, окон. The endings perfectly match the adjectives and nouns because they're all in the genitive. Here we have синий in the dative. Идти к синему столу, идти к синей машине, идти к синему окну, and идти к синим столам, машинам, окнам. The endings perfectly match the adjectives and nouns because they're all in the dative. Here we have синий in the instrumental. Я с синим столом, я с синей машиной, я с синим окном, and я с синими столами, машинами, окнами. The endings perfectly match the adjectives and nouns because they're all in the instrumental. Finally, we have синий in the prepositional. Я говорю о синем столе, я говорю о синей машине, я говорю о синем окне, and я говорю о синих столах, машинах, окнах. The endings once again perfectly match the adjectives and nouns because they're all in the prepositional. This is how normal descriptive adjectives work in Russian. They have to match in gender, case, and plurality, but practically, you will not use half of what I showed, even though it was a good practicing lesson. As always, in case you get lost or forget how to use normal adjectives, you can watch this video again or use Schooljugator for help. For now, this is all you have to know.